I love it. Hey, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
It's terrific to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great talking to you. So let's begin our journey into your very busy life by asking you this. 4.5 years ago or so, this pandemic was raging. Everything started changing. It created kind of this wave that we're still dealing with to today. So, uh, how did you survive that time period, and how has it influenced the way that you live life now?
Interesting. I live in Florida, so the pandemic hit us kind of differently than
Yeah.
everybody else, but my company is global. When the pandemic started, my startup, the one that I co-founded, we had always really struggled because our clients wanted us to come on site. And when you have clients in Switzerland and California and the Philippines, going on site wasn't realistic for us. And so oddly, COVID was good for our business because suddenly some of the people who had been so, well, if I can't put my hands on you, we're not going to work together, they had to find a different way of working. And
Yeah.
so, we had been 100% virtual since the start because, we had at the time people spread across 6 different countries. And so, since we had been virtual from our outset, professionally, it was a good thing for us. Personally, it was difficult. We had a 70 plus year old relative living with us. I have 3 kids, all the same age, long story. And so, from a family perspective, our house became somewhat like a space station. I think for everybody else, we all went through the same thing. And all of us packed into that space was, family wise, it was a huge challenge. The good thing for us from that, though, is as things started to loosen up, we realized we'd actually grown together quite a bit more. And, some of the increased sort of cohesion that created in our family relationships stays with us today. We have positive memories of sort of growing together during that time. So I think that's, for me, professionally and personally, you had to make the best of what you could. And for the first time, we all had the same challenge. And I
Yeah.
think that was a big change in our culture.
Yeah, I think the virtual thing at the end of the day was really a good thing. I think there's things that we can do, but ironically, it really reconfirmed that we're humans and we have to intermingle, right?
Yes.
So there's a lot of those things, and it's the ultimate dichotomy of our modern living, you know?
True. True. Well, and it's the thing that kind of influenced what I'm doing today, because one of the things I realized is people are terrible at talking about themselves and talking about their past.
Yeah.
And, we really struggle. We either sound arrogant, we sound, like we're puffing ourselves up. So people really, I think we lost this a long time before COVID, but I think people sort of drifted away from valuing interpersonal connections,
Yeah.
physical face-to-face connections. And I think that is more than anything else, it accelerated a slide that we were already starting to a point where a lot of people today, even people who through their entire career worked closely with other people and were very comfortable in that sort of communication, they've sort of lost it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big challenge for us is getting that back.
Absolutely. So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids. It's career day, and the kid in the back of the room is curious, and he's like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you simplify that?
This is always a struggle because career day was always terrible for me because, since I live on the space coast of Florida, there was always an astronaut or there's somebody who's doing something
Right.
amazingly cool. And so, I get to follow the astronaut, the fire person, but for what I do today is I exited my successful startup about a year ago to change industries. I've been in tech for most of my career and I decided to get into space. I wanted to get into the space business. And what came home to me was something I'd seen in technology, but I just thought it was limited to that one industry. And that is this inability of people to create networks of people who could actually help them get where they're trying to go. We all think of networking as just what I call the endless introduction. You go to event after event after event, you always say the same thing, you don't listen to anybody else, and then you wonder why you're not getting anything back out of it.
Yeah.
And so, my time now in the space industry brought home to me this idea that people need a way to talk about what they've done that clearly explains it, but also motivates the person they're talking to start connecting them to other people.
Yeah.
And so for me today, what I do is, as with everybody, I have a few different things I'm doing, but the thing I'm excited about is teaching my clients how to package what they've done in a way that drives towards their goal. And I think that's the most rewarding thing for me. I started doing coaching 5 years ago when I kind of looked around and I realized I just had one tool in my leadership toolbox, and that was fear. And I learned that leadership tool at, when I was in the military, and then when I was at Dell, and then when I was at Oracle. Leadership by fear was a big way we did things. And so a number of years ago, I realized in my startup, there was no point in making anybody afraid because I couldn't afford to lose any of them. They were all these like, super unique experts. So I had to go and reskill to have other tools in the leadership toolbox other than fear. And that led me into coaching, and it's kind of steered me to where I am today.
So, what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your ultimate dream for your life?
Wow, third grade. So, obvious. What's funny is I never wanted to be an astronaut.
Okay.
Because I grew up here. So you would
Yeah.
think, oh, in third grade, I want to be an astronaut. The funny thing is, in the third grade, I really wanted to design games.
Yeah.
That was the big thing. I would get a piece of cardboard with my crayons and that sort of thing, and I'd make my own board games. That was fascinating to me. And nobody wanted to play the games designed by somebody in the third grade. Trust
Yeah.
me, they were tedious. But that was if you asked me what I wanted to be, that was it.
So, how did these skills get harvested of technology, leadership, being an entrepreneur, getting into space? How did all of these things begin and cultivate and evolve into who you are today?
Wow. So great question. So I think for me, it really started. I began to realize that I wasn't going to have a normal career path. My first job was negotiating contracts for the United States Air Force,
Yeah.
and I kind of lucked into negotiating contracts with people who'd won the Nobel Prize. Because we it's a unique series of circumstances. But I realized very early on that I had multiple tracks. I'm really good with computers. That's where my degrees are in, that sort of thing. But I'm also really good at leading people. I'm also really good as a negotiator. So I began to have to realize I'm going to have to tie all these strings together. And I think that for me was the key that when I looked for my next job, it's it's almost difficult when you have too many things that you can do because people don't really take you seriously. It's like
Yeah.
if I'm hiring a negotiator, I don't want somebody who's also good at computers. I want somebody who's like lives and breathes negotiation. And that was really a mindset, early in my career that I had to fight against. And so that versatility, that being versatile, it's one of the reasons I keep sort of pendulum. I'll swing into government, Fortune 100, all that kind of stuff. Then I swing back to entrepreneurship because I think entrepreneurship rewards that sort of mixed background ability to do a bunch of different things. And
Yeah.
so I think in a lot of ways, that's what got me where I am today is finding those opportunities to use as many of those traits, those skills as I possibly could.
So, being in technology, what in all of these years you've seen it evolve, what is your favorite piece of software and your favorite piece of hardware?
Wow. Okay. So I worked for Dell for a number of years.
Yeah.
And I worked at Dell. We had a competitor called Compaq.
Yeah.
HP bought them. And if you walked in to Dell with a Compaq or IBM computer under your arm, we'd send you back to your car, if you're a salesperson, to put your computer away and come back. You would be on pen and paper for that visit. But then somebody would walk in with a Sony computer.
Yeah.
And Sony, the computers were purple and they were really well thought out and well designed. And all of us Dell hardware nerds, we wanted to play with their Sony computer. So I think in a lot of ways, that sort of, mid 90s Sony computer really sticks in my mind as something that was very cool at the time.
And that was the Vio line, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So that was
Interesting.
that was yeah, that was huge. And when I started my career, laptops weren't commonplace.
Yeah.
And so, I think that was the big change for me. I think software, it's interesting because the this is going to really nerd out. I apologize. So when I was in the military, I ran a mini computer series from a company called Wang. We won't even go there.
Yeah.
And my job was to try and get that talking to what was the early days of the internet. So kind of going backwards and forwards and trying to get that computer to talk to the outside world, that for me was I probably shouldn't have been doing it,
Yeah.
but here we are. The statutes of limitations have long expired. But it was just that was truly rewarding for me was kind of digging in and solving the communication problem between those two very different computer systems. And
Yeah.
so, for me today, honestly, AI has eclipsed any application I've ever played with.
It's
I've
crazy.
really, really gotten heavily into using it kind of in my day-to-day work. And so I think if you cornered me and said you have to pick a piece of software, I think it would have to be, Chat GPT or Claude or, those AI platforms.
I've been in technology my whole life. I'm an IT tech guy for a school district, so I get it. Like looking at what Chat GPT can do, just even to call SEO out of a paragraph is
Right.
amazing. Just little things to more magnanimous things. Um, so I'm curious, like I said, I grew up as a kid of the 80s. I was waiting for that 86 shuttle to go in the sky so Christy McAuliffe could teach us. I've been kind of a student and a disciple of the whole space program. And I think anybody that has a background in tech and imagination, the idea of going into space and Arthur C. Clarke and all of those fantasies come to mind. So when we look at 2025 right now, we are in the future that we looked at when we were kids. What
Right.
is your hope for space? Are you
Hmm.
hoping that we colonize another planet? Are you hoping we discover things about ourselves? What is your hope for space?
Interesting. I think for me, the big change for space is that it becomes less about government and more about commercial. Because where I think we are right now in the space industry, it's as if, the early days of the United States, we have these railroads going west, but only government people and cars are allowed to be on them.
Yeah,
And so I think that was, that's one of the big changes. I grew up reading Robert Heinlein, so Kansas City, Robert Heinlein, kind of huge from there.
yeah,
And so yes, that sort of bold adventurousness in space, but really tied to real people doing real things.
yeah,
And so I think that's one of the reasons I started to get excited about space again was SpaceX launching at the just incredible pace that they're launching.
yeah,
And they've put, tons into orbit. They launch here these days about once every 3 days.
yeah,
And being able to just begin to realize that space is becoming a place where actual things get done is that's beyond communication satellites or all the weather kind of satellites that we've had for decades. Now space is a place where there's a company near me that build or that manufactures the basics of semiconductors in space. They're experimenting with how to do that and then deorbit that plate to the Earth where we can now make semiconductors with some of the stuff they're working on. So that kind of real stuff that people are doing, that for me is I feel like space is going from this very specialized, kind of everything's an F-15 to we're in that sort of Piper Cub sort of early days of planes that did other things. And I think that's the best case scenario. And
yeah,
whether we do it to colonize other planets, the thing that really gets me is going and mining asteroids and bringing those materials back so we don't have to mine here on Earth with all the environmental damage that creates, that sort of thing.
yeah.
That I think for me really comes down to be one of the things I'm looking forward to the most.
So as a sports, I'm into sports, and I remember the first time I saw NASCAR at the Kansas Speedway. I had no idea what to expect. I just never watched it on TV. It was never something, but I remember getting out there and feeling the rumble and feeling the force. And I think about a spaceship going up into the sky. What was the feeling like the first time you saw that? What was the visceral reaction you had?
I think that you're stunned
Yeah.
more than anything else. Especially if you're within the reach where you can feel the vibration. It's just overpowering in a lot of ways. And I grew up on Air Force bases and have been around airplanes my entire life, that sort of thing. So I was expecting it to be something like that. And I was very young when I saw my first launch. But one of the things that changed recently with that, so you think about the launch, you think about the rumble, you think about watching it go up. But recently, they started changing the direction that they launch from. So
Okay.
instead of the launch goes up and it goes out over the ocean, you wave it goodbye, it's cool, you hear a rumble, that sort of thing. The launch actually goes a lot more south than east now. So you're getting the rumble for longer and you feel the vibration more intensely because the rocket's not going the same way it always has.
Yeah.
And so I have this door next to my bed in my bedroom. And the first time they launched on that trajectory, it was like a nutcase was on my back patio trying to wrench the door open. And you know, I jumped out of bed. I just, what on earth could that possibly be? And it was just the change in that rumble. And we're not even talking about Starship that launches out of Texas, which is just an order of magnitude more power than
Yeah.
we've ever seen from a rocket, even the Saturn V's back during the Apollo era. So I think that's the thing. It's one of the things I always tell people if they come to Orlando, look online. It's very easy to find out when the next launch is, and you can get very close to the launch without paying anybody. You just drive out here, you kind of park off the side of the road and watch it go up, and it's
Yeah.
it's tremendously impressive.
That is cool. I remember I used to work in downtown Kansas City when the air shows came in. Some of those pilots had a good sense of humor and they would send a sonic boom out. And people would warn me. They're like, be careful when you're out walking around because a boom will totally transfix your brain cells. You won't know what happened.
Well, the interesting thing is now that SpaceX flies the first part of the rocket back to the ground, that's the big thing they changed. Normally, they land the first part of that rocket out on a boat in the ocean just because it's cheaper to do that. Need less fuel. But about one time in 10, it works out that they can land that first stage 10 miles from my house. And as that's coming in, it makes two sonic booms.
Yeah.
And so invariably, we'll have a launch, and it's 8 minutes later that that thing is flying back or those things are flying back. Sometimes two of them fly back at the same time. And we always forget there's going to be a sonic boom. And it always scares the heck out of me
Yeah.
when that happens. But it's just, I think, more impressive for me than watching rockets launch because I've watched that my whole life. Suddenly, after 2016, they're coming back and landing.
Yeah.
And that's just been amazing.
That is amazing. So, who's been a hero for you? Who's been that inspirational force in your life?
Oof. Well, I learned very early on, pick heroes who aren't here anymore, because that way they can't disappoint you, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's
I,
right.
yeah, one of my heroes growing up that I've always just idolized is Theodore Roosevelt, the president. I think mainly because I had asthma growing up. He had horrible asthma at a time when a lot of people didn't survive asthma. So that was my first connection to him. But then I think that for me more than anybody else, he just has this sort of almost stoic approach to life
Yeah.
that has always challenged me. I've always kind of tried to be as good as my idealized mental picture of him is. But I think that for me is my hero.
So, if you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now, whether it's an entrepreneur, it's a business leader, anybody that's alive that you find fascinating that might help you on your journey in life, just to hang out with them, ask some questions. Is there anybody like that?
Hmm. Interesting. I think, one of the things I learned early on was that executives are people. So when I worked for Dell, I met Michael Dell. When I worked for Oracle, and so that for me is it kind of brought home to me that everybody's just people. We can have a conversation with everyone. The Nobel laureates that I worked with, there were two of them, one former Soviet Union and one from the Nordic countries. They were just the most down-to-earth, normal people you can
Yeah,
imagine. They'd already proved everything they needed to prove to anyone, right? So for me, I think, when I think about alive, I think I would love to talk with Elon Musk, but
yeah,
I'm terrified of talking with Elon Musk. I think a lot of us are like that. It's like, wow, you meet somebody who outclasses your intellect by that much. It's very intimidating to think about talking to them. So I think that would definitely be one of the people. I think the other key for me is I've seen some people on podcasts, Greg McEwen, that sort of thing, that I would really love to have a conversation because I think I get a lot out of it.
yeah.
So I think those really come home for me. I have learned the hard way that there is such a thing as a dumb question. I know because I've asked some. So I think that's the flip side of that. You kind of think about what you'd want to ask.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talk about the Nobel Prize winners covering the world of jazz. I've talked to legends before, and they
Right.
are so humble. They're so grounded. And sometimes I'm in the middle of the conversation. I'm like, I'm talking to so and so, whether it's Sonny Rollins, and it's like they really just. I think you get to a place in life where you realize that people just are people, and I think that's one of the worst parts of the internet and things when I hear about all of this ugliness. You wouldn't say that in front of somebody. You wouldn't
No.
go up to their face. You just wouldn't. And it's like that's where the civility kind of technology has kind of cheapened the civility that humans have with each other, and it's made it, more accessible for people to do that. But anyway, I'm not trying to steer too far off course, but talking about Nobel Prize winners, I would love to talk to some of them because they're just people and they hit that culmination in their life where everything came together and they're getting recognized finally.
Well, and so often they come from academia, and wow, there is no environment more knives out than
Yeah,
academics who've have tenure and they've been working in a university because I have three children, they're all in college, and wow, you're working with the same people for decades,
yeah,
in those academic environments. But the thing I always found when I was doing this was it was the people around them
yeah,
who were so arrogant or so, just convinced of their mentor's importance. And there's a terrific story about the Far Side
yeah.
cartoon and
Oh
Dr.
yeah,
Jane Goodall.
yeah,
And there was Gary Larson, the artist behind the Far Side. He drew this amazing cartoon of two apes, and the female ape is pulling a hair off of the male ape, and is like, blonde. You've been hanging out with that tramp Goodall again, right? And Jane Goodall's people were horrified, and they bombarded Gary Larson with, "You're a terrible person." Jane Goodall loved it. She had
yeah.
that was one of her favorite things that ever happened.
Uh-huh.
And that for me was just that difference between somebody who's already made it and
Yeah,
the people around them sort of riding their coattails who feel very defensive about their legacy.
totally
And you
right.
kind of have to balance the two.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's interesting. You brought up that Dell story. We have a big Ford plant here right outside of Kansas City in a place called Claycomo. And I heard horror stories where people that started at the plant would drive up in a Toyota or a Nissan and it would literally be gutted and burned and destroyed, just like you said about the computers coming in. I totally forgot about that story. But it is, I mean, it's knives out. Capitalism is like sport. It can be really bad.
Well, and in some ways, it's a good sign when it is, not to the
Yeah,
point of burning people's cars out,
sure.
but really, if you have that much passion for your
Uh,
brand, for the company you're working for,
yeah,
then I think it's a good sign. Um, but I think the competitive impulse could be carried too far, where we start trying to injure each other or hurt each other's business through it. I think the thing is, if something's better, I I I have no hesitation at all
yeah.
by saying something's better. If I'm just passionate about it because I'm comfortable with the brand, I don't really talk about it much because I don't know if it's better or not. I'm just more comfortable buying that.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think that's we have to acknowledge both impulses because people don't buy for our reasons, they buy for their reasons.
Yeah,
So we need to think about that when we're selling to them.
yeah. So when you look at the arc of your career, what's the biggest risk you've ever taken?
I'm in the middle of it right now.
Okay.
So I left the Air Force after 10 years,
Yeah,
and so that was a risk. I started a company 11 years ago. That was a big risk. And right now, what I've done is I've stepped away from either going back to being a Fortune 100 VP or starting my own business and hiring people and all that sort of stuff, and really focusing on advising people based on not only what I know, but also what they already know. That's a big part of coaching that I really liked, that I wanted to explore a little bit more right now.
yeah,
And so for me, that's a risk because so often I want to solve people's problems for them and then tell them, here's your solution. It's done. You're welcome. And I've found doing that my entire career has gotten me a long way. It's been fantastic. But I think the big risk for me now is taking the extra time so that somebody finds their own solution, because then they'll adopt their own solution a lot faster than they'll adopt mine.
yeah.
And so I think that for me is the big risk, is shifting from telling people what to do and making things happen to working with people and letting things happen. I think that's been a big shift for me.
So if you had a dream tonight, ran into the 18-year-old version of you, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, the wisdom you've gained, what advice would you give that young version?
Do you think it would matter? Because he wouldn't listen to me.
That's right. That's the other part. That's always part B of the question.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing is it was interesting. I I had the opportunity recently to read something from somebody who passed away 20 years ago when they were 44 years old.
Yeah.
And they were a dear, dear, dear person to me. And they wrote something, and their answer is my answer. They said, I would have taken more risks.
Yeah.
I would have lived more. I would have worried less about the numbers in my bank account and what people thought about me and that sort of thing. And I would have focused a lot more on not so much, follow your dream, the money will follow, but really, is what I'm doing now the thing that I'm here to do? And I think that's more than anything else, my kids are about that age. So I have conversations with them a lot about this. And I think more than any other single thing, it would be, follow that. Don't worry so much about what people think or what the monetary reward is. Think about what you're trying to accomplish in your life and make sure you're doing that.
So at the end of the day, when you look at all these accomplishments and everything you've done in your career, what are you the proudest of?
That's a tough one. Career-wise, there are a lot of things I've changed or I've built that I'm proud of. I think more than anything else from a professional point of view. I mean, my family is always going to be the thing in my life I'm the proudest of.
Yeah.
But from a professional point of view, it's somewhat similar. I think about all the people who've passed me. There are some people I'm thinking about who, used to work for me and now are very high level, very, very, well-regarded people. They passed me in their career. And there are also a ton of people who've worked for me that really I treated more like peers, and we really accomplished a lot of things together, more than we would have accomplished with me standing on top of the hill shouting down at everybody.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, the thing I'm proudest of is just, those people that I've worked with and what they've been able to accomplish, in part because we would push against each other, we would have ideas, we'd talk back and forth. And more than anything I've accomplished, I think it's unleashing those people on the world that's probably my proudest accomplishment.
Very cool. So at the end of the day, everyone has this perception of you. Family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
It's interesting. It's been evolving because, I've gone from being the person who wants to tell everybody because I'm pretty smart and I have a lot of experience to being the person who asks better questions. That's been the hardest thing I had to learn this year was going from telling to asking. And so for when I look at myself from the outside, I think I'm changing. And as we get older, the perception is we stop changing. We kind of start locking in on who we are. And I think the best thing for me has been, okay, I changed industries from tech to space. I'm now going deep into semiconductors for a lot of different reasons. And learning a new industry, meeting an entirely new group of people, and being on this personal journey where you're fixing something fundamental to who you are, that's I feel 10 years younger
Yeah.
than I did 10 years ago. I feel amazing compared to where I was. So I think if there's something I look at myself from the outside and I hope I never change is that refound willingness to learn new things because I kind of lost that over the last 10 or 15 years and it's good to have it back.
Everybody always talks about going back to school and getting a master's or a PhD. I think going back to kindergarten is the way to go. Because that's where, right? It's where all the wonder and the fantasia and everything that like one of my favorite poets, his quote is, "We're born geniuses and buried idiots." Unfortunately, as we get older, we put fences around all these things in our lives. And if we would just keep that wonder of being alive on this planet, like a spaceship going into orbit, I think we would be in better shape.
Agreed.
So,
Completely agree.
so if anyone wants to reach out, they want to learn more, they have questions, any of the good business, where do they go?
Sure. The best website to get a hold of me is mystage2.com, mystage, and then the number two, or any of the other spellings is fine. But mystage2.com is the best way to get a hold of me, or by all means, connect on LinkedIn. I do a lot of my coaching through LinkedIn.
Okay, wonderful. Stephen, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. Best of luck with everything.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. It was wonderful. All right.